Hi everyone, today is Free Comic Book Day, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. For this special episode, we're going to be discussing obscure comic book movies. Stay tuned. Fox Valley Film Critics, brought to you by FVTV and Groupthink Productions. Today is, as I stated, is Free Comic Book Day, this day that celebrates comic books and that it's a medium and their long history. And over the course of the past century, they have become one of the most prolific forms of pop media we have, and naturally that's kind of bled over into the films, where they've gotten dozens of films, if not, I don't know how many at this point. The last 10 years have brought about, the last 10, 20 years actually, has brought about a huge glut of superhero films that have kind of redefined the modern blockbuster landscape, but a lot of really good ones are kind of lost in the fray as big movies like The Avengers and The Dark Knight go on and make hundreds of billions of dollars and change cinema as we know it. And I like to go back into the fray and find obscure comic book adaptions that most people have never heard of, and that's what the whole point of the special is, to offer a look at two very, not necessarily totally obscure films, but films that you might have overlooked in the recent history. And joining me today, once again, is Tom Franklin, who was here with us a couple weeks ago for the last show. And he has picked the first of our two obscure comic book movies to discuss.
Yep. I chose Road to Perdition.
Also the movie you recommended last time you were on.
Absolutely. That's a great movie. Road to Perdition, for those who don't remember, is a movie based on a graphic novel, I guess, printed by one of DC Comics' standbys, Vertigo Comics. It's about two Irish gangsters in the 1930s, 1931 to be exact. Great comic book. Basically, am I allowed to give like a brief rundown of what happens?
Yeah, totally. This is
awesome.
We want to get people interested in this film.
So basically, it's about a man getting revenge for a man who worked for one family of the Irish mafia, basically as a cleaner, the guy to go and talk to people.
Diplomacy.
Yes, diplomacy, as it were. And basically, his mob boss's son, known to be kind of crazy, basically puts a hit out on the main character's son, who witnessed them off someone, because the crazy one decided to just shoot someone because he can. Basically, he's been swindling money for a long time from his own father, and so the whole premise is that the main character goes out and basically hunts down the guy who ultimately murdered his wife and other son, not killing the son that actually witnessed the crime, and his son follows him along during this time, so you kind of get to see what an interesting perspective of gangster life back in the 1930s of a kid following his dad around to go kill people and rob banks.
I definitely had a lot of interesting thoughts about watching the film. I think that one of the most interesting aspects of the film is that it's kind of a transitionary kind of film between two different generations of filmmaking, where half the actors are established old actors like Paul Newman, who were classic in the 60s and the 70s, but the other half are actors who would go on to kind of become big things, like Daniel Craig and Jude Law?
Jude Law?
Yeah. It's really fascinating just how many older and then very proto versions of actors we'd come to know are in this film.
Yep.
So it kind of feels like a transitionary film where you're seeing a lot of people handing the torch over, not necessarily that Paul Newman handed the torch of something over to Daniel Craig, but I don't know what he would have handed him, but you are actor.
Right.
But there's definitely kind of a sense that there's a transition between older cinema and newer cinema, especially with the fact that the director of this, who was famous in the 90s for American Beauty, went on to, Sam Mendes, he would go on to direct the two most recent James Bond films, one of which is one of the best ones ever. So
yeah. Also starring Tom Hanks, my second favorite actor of all time. He might be a little biased in why I chose that movie, but he does a really good job. If you're not already interested in watching the movie because of It Is What It Is, Tom Hanks can flow into almost any role and do it perfectly.
There's a lot of power to see like the classic. He's kind of like the classic American dad image, and seeing him as that image, like violently killing people with Tommy guns, is just like that's really powerful just as a sight on itself.
Yeah.
It almost carries the movie by itself, but it's otherwise a solid film.
Yeah, I mean it's so weird because like publicly Tom Hanks is such a nice guy, and then to think of him like as a 1930s gangster just shooting people, just destroying lives is it's really odd. And to see him pull it off and look like, yes, this is what I do, this is who I am, it's another great reason just to watch the movie, just to see that.
There's kind of a disconnect with the character between what he does and what he acts like in the film. Because he acts like Tom Hanks' man, which is clean-cut, nice 30s dad, and then he just does all these horrible murders, so it just kind of has that kind of power to it.
Yeah, it's weird to see that that switch, between Tom Hanks being Tom Hanks, and then going into basically
James Cagney mode, essentially.
Yeah, is going and just murdering tons of people. It's really interesting. But knowing that his character, the character he plays, was raised by a mob boss, but the mob boss is also very nice and kind, it kind of makes sense a little bit that he would have that switch. Yeah,
there's a lot of just people being nice to each other and businesslike in the film. Not to the point where it's like satire on the grounds of like a Godfather, where it's all about the relationship between crime and business.
Right.
But there's definitely a bit of just them being nice to each other, and because they're decent fellows, they just kill people for a living.
Yeah, just average, everyday, normal guys.
I told you when you were watching, this is a tangent, but I told you when you were watching the film that I went to school for sound design for a film, and one of my sound design teachers, we were going through different examples of films for just like studying their sound design and like stuff like that, and we got to a point where we watched a clip from Thor: The Dark World, and he's like, I love comic book movies, I love just sitting back, but sometimes I just like to watch like a more complicated movie that's not based off of a comic. And he pulls out Road to Perdition, and I immediately look it up, and I'm like, based on a graphic novel.
Yep.
Wow, my teacher doesn't read.
Based on a graphic novel.
Yeah, that I just love that. It's one of those films like when we did our last episode, we talked about comic books tend to be a great medium for things other than superheroes, but most people don't think about that. So you go into any comic book store, 2/3 of the space is Marvel, DC, but then there's a third of the space that's completely not comic book related. So it's everything else. And Road to Perdition as a comic is definitely in that kind of part where it's everything else.
I think it's pretty cool that Road to Perdition was published by DC, known of being more gritty and being more detective-like.
Vertigo is their adult line, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
So
it's published through Vertigo, and I enjoy that. If you have not gone into a comic book store and picked up a Vertigo comic, definitely do so. There are other, DC ones, like I know multiple times we've talked about Grayson.
That's a Vertigo comic?
No, but like there are many other just straight Marvel or DC comics that don't fit superhero genre. Definitely give them a check.
Totally, even if they don't fit into the comic continuity, but this is definitely one that's worth recommending. I assume you've read Road to Perdition as a comic then? Or?
The graphic novel, Max Collins? Yep.
Okay, I haven't read it, so I can't speak to it.
It's pretty good. Definitely you should read it.
I'm curious how you'd fit this within the gangster movie genre. Would you rank this among all-time greats, or? It kind of comes off to me as like a pulpy film, like James Cagney's Public Enemy or something like that, where it's not elevating the genre, but it's just kind of imbibing like this really cool like gangster genre. So it's just being awesome as opposed to being transcendent.
You know, I agree and yet disagree, because it gives it the different feel. The feel you get from the movie of not just watching gangsters do what gangsters do, but riding along with some of the gangsters and watching them learn to do what they do, or why they do what they do. And it's weird because, as you said last time I was on, that I'm a man of controversial opinions. I don't like the Godfather movies.
Really?
At all.
I need to stick you in an AJ interview again soon.
I don't like them at all. And I think Road to Perdition is infinitely a greater gangster movie because it shows, what, The Godfather's more about, crime syndicate being, a business, and you don't cross the family and things like that. This one is all about crossing family. What happens when you do. Obviously, The Godfather brings that up as well.
It's a little more expedient, I would say.
Yeah. And I don't know, I feel that this is much more, you get a much better feel for it, and it's all in one movie instead of spread across 3 god-awfully long movies.
I'd say Road to Perdition is kind of what you'd call like a more traditional sort of film as opposed to The Godfather, where The Godfather is influential. This one is more just like, I'm going to go to the movies to see a crime film, and that's kind of what it is. And I don't know a lot of like old school crime movies that are also road movies.
Yeah.
That's kind of the fun idea of the film, is that they're on the run and they're in a car and they're basically just kind of doing gangster things on the road after this plot's been set up. So most of the duration of the film is it's father-son bonding over bank robbing.
Yeah.
I think my favorite scene in the film is the one where the kid starts asking for some of the money he gets back from it. It's like, I want to get some of the money we just stole. How much do you want? $200. And then dad's just sitting there looking. He's like, I got a crate full of $500,000. Like, all right, you can have it.
Yeah, okay. And the kid asks, like, could I have had more? It's like, you'll never know.
I forgot that. The kid's just like, score. And he's like, wait, I could have more? You'll never know now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good because there's a bit of that humor in it and a little bit of that playfulness to the movie, but also a very serious tone. Someone just killed his wife and kids, and he's going to go get them. But it's good that like you can, they throw playfulness and jokiness into it, because you realize one of the characters is just a kid.
Yeah, it's not a senselessly bleak film. Even though a lot of horrible things happen, but
yeah.
It definitely kind of gives it more of a poppy feel. Like, I'll make a quick digression. Did you see the recent Magnificent Seven movie?
I did.
Did you like it?
Yeah. I guess I'd have to say I liked it. I was kind of indifferent toward it, but there were many parts in which I was like, that was really good.
I've had this kind of conversation when I did my blogs about that film, that the reason I really love that film, and the reason why is that I felt like it's a modern version of the old style Western.
Right.
So it's not like an old Western. It's a pop Western. So it's you get all these big actors in a room, and then there's huge action scenes, and there's big explosions and stuff like that. So the reason I kind of thought was cool was that it's bringing all of the best elements of the old Western and updating it for something that makes it a little more contemporary to try to sell it to a modern audience. And apparently a lot of people did not like that. A lot of people thought it was like overdone, and that it was like processed and didn't have any character moments and stuff like that. But I thought it was like a really cool like exploration of elements like that. And I think that's kind of what I'm thinking of Road to Perdition, where it has that kind of, it's definitely a modern film. It's definitely the way you make movies now, where it's a little more conventional, but it's a modern version of like 40s pulp crime thrillers.
Right.
And it kind of imbibes it while not necessarily being better than a lot of those old films. Like there's probably 4 or 5, more than that. There's hundreds of them, but there's a ton of them I would put above Road to Perdition, like White Heat or Public Enemy, just like old James Cagney films. But
yeah,
it definitely feels like you would put it in regards to that kind of pre-code era violent gangster films of the past.
It kind of reminds me of the movie Lawless, I think it is.
I haven't seen that.
Is that Lawless? It's the one with Shia LaBeouf. I don't think that's what I'm looking for.
Fun fact, last month he had a movie in London and only one person bought a ticket.
Oh wow.
All right.
I would have bought a ticket.
Yeah, you'd be the only other person. So that's it for this discussion of Road to Perdition. Definitely check that out if you get the chance. Thank you for bringing that up. For our next segment, we'll bring in my suggested film, which is Punisher Warzone. Stay tuned.
Does this help at all?
Anything helps, ma'am. Just try to get some sleep now.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, me neither. I'm on my way.
Good coffee, huh?
Oh my God! What are you doing in my apartment?
A lot of the films before the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the recent DC Universe have largely gone kind of, not bad, but they've kind of fallen by the wayside as most superhero movies have fallen into large continuity-driven franchises where part of the fun is just watching the story go by, as characters pop in and out of each other's stories. But before 2008, it was much more common to see more centralized films with less continuity-driven. And one of the last ones that we got really before the age of the continuity-driven ones was Punisher Warzone, a very kind of old-school 80s action drama starring, I forget the name of the actor, Ray Stevenson, as the enigmatic Punisher, who's most recently been taken up by John Bernthal in the Daredevil miniseries on Netflix. And what makes this one kind of cool is that it's kind of a kind of return to the old styles of ultra-violent 80s action films. Thomas, I should say. What did you think of Punisher Warzone?
Ultra-violence is a very good way to describe it. I wasn't against it, ultra-violence for the sake of ultra-violence is typically something I don't really care for all that much. I guess I have more negative opinions of the movie. It's a really good movie.
Feel free to air them. I want to hear it.
Oh, okay. There's absolutely no story to this movie whatsoever.
We go, from the sublime to the ridiculous, essentially.
Yeah, basically it has, it falls into that category of having a lot of plot. And by plot, I mean gunfire. Gunfire and guts, just because. And, it kind of makes sense for the character because that's what the character is about. He's about punishing people. But you never know why he's punishing who. There are times where it's briefly explained, this is the person he's going after and this is why. But what is his motivation to do what he does? They don't, again, it's not an origin story, and that's okay, because you don't need more origin stories for the same character.
There have been 3 Punisher films to date. There was the 1980s Ralph
Lundgren.
Yeah, Ralph Lundgren version, which I find hilarious. There's the really bad one with John Travolta, which is the origin story of the Punisher.
Yes.
And then there's this one, which is just no more origin story. He's gonna kill everyone. So I was recommended this film by several people who I respect, and I was wondering about it, so I bought a copy of it, and I have been kind of putting off seeing it for a while until this review, where I was like, okay, this would be kind of a good one to go watch. And upon watching it, holy crap, it's so cool. The 12-year-old in my brain is just going nuts right now. Oh my gosh, so many people die really, really badly. And just like, it's such a gore splatter fest, but it's like the fun version of that, where it's not like depressing.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of violence, but there's a certain catharsis to it. I love like old '80s cheesy action movies like Cobra, Death Wish, Commando. Those are the best. Even when they're utterly terrible, they are the best. Yeah. They have no plot. Their characters can be boiled down to a long series of action one-liners, and they're way more entertaining than 90% of anything else that's come out in the past 30 years. But
they can be, yeah.
I swear, I've shown Death Wish 3 to my friends about 5 times, and they hate me for it. But yeah, this definitely kind of felt like it was picking up the slack on that. Yeah, it's weird to think that this movie came out the same year as Iron Man and The Dark Knight, where you can definitely see why it went under the radar. Yeah. But it's like, there's great prestigious movies with continuity and all this great stuff, and oh my gosh, Nick Fury is at the end of Iron Man. Spoiler for a 10-year-old movie, but yeah. But this
Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Oh my gosh. But yeah. It's definitely kind of imbibing that classic 80s, we're going to put a really cool guy on screen and make him kill everyone. So I'm just sitting here, it's like, you know what? I could analyze this film to oblivion. There's no plot. It's super cathartic, and that's probably insanely unhealthy. From an emotional level, I should not be liking the fact that so many human beings are dying in horrible ways.
Yeah.
But then I always have this thing where I was like, if I'm analyzing a film like this, should I turn my brain off and let me just enjoy it because the film obviously isn't putting the effort in, or should I be analytical? So I kind of ride the line on both at any given moment, where I can watch Cobra and be like, wow, this film has no plot. I have no idea. There's nothing that's happening right now. But then I'm just sitting here like, you're thinking about it. You shouldn't be thinking about it. And that's definitely kind of the case in Punisher Warzone, where it's just kind of replacing plot with content. Which it's not. The content isn't bad, so it's not boring and it's not painful to watch or anything. But it definitely has that kind of thing to it. I'll tell you what. Probably the thing I liked most about the movie was probably the villain. Like, I thought that was like, so many of these like one-off superhero movies, they have the worst villains, but the villain's name is Jigsaw. I thought they came up with the version of, I don't know the Punisher comics, so this could be totally canon or not. I thought the version they came up with was really clever, where it's not like he's some big superpowered guy who the Punisher has to go off against. He's just a gangster who got his head fed to a wood chipper, and now he had to get plastic surgery, and now he's gone crazy and he's trying to murder everyone, Joker style. Yeah. There's a little bit of a Batman '89 in there, just like from like plot is like
Michael Keaton's.
Yeah, Michael Keaton Batman. There's definitely kind of that, where the bad guy gets like thrown into a situation where his body's mangled and he goes crazy. But this kind of took that to the extreme of like ultra violence, and he rescues his brother out of jail, and his brother proceeds to eat like a guy's heart.
his spleen or liver, one of the two.
I thought it was heart, but I was a little too. That particular shot was a little too gory for me to watch. But
there was, a remark I want to make about that is, the movie has a way of making you root not for the good guy, but for whoever's about to kill somebody. Like when
that's amazing.
In that scene where he rescues his brother from a mental ward, his brother's just sitting there chained to something, and this dude's like kind of torturing him by like, putting food near his face and then eating it himself. And I'm like, man, I'd be so mad at that dude. Like, I'd want to kill him. And he finally gets it, and at that point when you see him, get unchained, unrestrained, your immediate thought is, oh yeah, get him. You want him to kill that guy, and it's odd, unhealthy, and yet really awesome that a movie can make you root for whoever is about to kill someone. Like, I don't care if they're good or bad. Someone's gonna die.
Probably to be fair to like the analysis part of my brain, that is so emotionally unhealthy it hurts.
It is, yeah.
Just the idea that this film is like, kill your fellow man, kill, kill, kill.
Yeah,
But
it's definitely not a good thing.
there's certainly there's a lot to be discussed there about like catharsis and the power of entertainment to make you think about stuff like that. Like, where do you come down on like sensitivity at like over like what's the term desensitizing people and like content like that in films?
Yeah.
Where do you come down on that?
Well, I studied psychology for many years. I wanted to be a therapist when I was younger. Learned eventually that's not really what I want to be doing. And it's weird because I also grew up doing martial arts, very around violence a lot, and I grew up very desensitized to it. Desensitized, I should say. I never liked violence, but there are a lot of things, like a lot of movies that are, especially ultra-violent movies. The one-off ultra-violent movies are an entirely different story. They're not meant to influence you. You're supposed to be like, well, that movie had no plot. It was just a bunch of killing stuff, like this one. But even larger screen movies, big ticket movies, have that, kind of making you desensitized to violence a little bit. And violence is a thing that happens in the world. So being desensitized to it is both a good thing and a bad thing. Knowing that it happens, it happens. You're gonna have to deal with it. But letting it affect you in a way that, like, wow, that really sucks.
There's a huge debate that exists between people who say that technology kind of averts our pulses, or not film and like entertainment averts our impulses to follow certain things, or it makes us embrace it. Like, I've heard, this is going to be super like stereotypical, but in Japan, where people tend to associate their entertainment as mildly pornographic, but this is also a country where they tend to be way more into like edgelordy stuff that's a little bit more taboo here in the United States, but they
Right.
have less problems with certain issues that you might assume that might correspond with that. So people who are watching a lot of that content aren't going out and doing a lot of the bad things they're seeing in those animations
Right.
and stuff like that. And I think it's obvious that most people here aren't watching Stallone films and going out and murdering people.
Yeah.
But I think that the important part of the debate here is how are they contextualizing the violence?
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying that from they shouldn't have allowed to do it, because I absolutely love Punisher Warzone, and I absolutely love Cobra and old movies like that. It's
Rambo.
just, well, I don't know if that would count as one. I think that's slightly elevated, but
Right.
how they contextualize the violence on a moment-to-moment basis is important, because if you don't kind of self-analyze why you're watching something, you can get yourself into a bad position where it's either you're interacting with it in an unhealthy way,
Right.
or you are letting kind of desensitize you or make you or do things like, I don't know, but the film definitely contextualizes the violence in a way where it makes you want it.
Yes.
And I don't know if I particularly like that beyond the 12-year-old in my brain that won't stop screaming at me. But
Right.
yeah, it's one of those things where I love it to death, and I know I shouldn't. But I think that the fact that I know I shouldn't is probably a good thing.
I think the big thing with the violence in the movie, like, one, I don't like violence, but man, it looks cool. But on top of that, it takes me back to when I was finishing up my days in high school many years ago. There was a story of a couple girls who got mad at some other girl for something, and they relentlessly beat her for 30 minutes.
Jeez.
And, like, what that did to that woman, like, it was just a couple, teenage kids. Like, they had seen a lot of, like, really violent movies, probably. And, not that influenced them, but it's just that they were so desensitized to the violence they had seen in their life that they thought it was okay, and that 30 minutes of hitting somebody wouldn't really do much.
Yeah,
And,
it's a huge debate, and
Yeah.
maybe we shouldn't be dedicating most of our free comic book day special to violence discussions. But Yeah, I think that understanding where this stuff lies is important with how you enjoy it, and I love the movie to death. I definitely want people to go check it out, and if you haven't seen it, definitely do. It's probably widely available now, so it's not hard to find.
Good
But
movie.
Yeah,
Good movie.
yeah. This has been a wonderful free comic book day. Come check out more of our old episodes on our Groupthink Productions YouTube page. You can follow me on Twitter at @AntisocialCriti. That's critic without the C at the end. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming on for this episode. Have a good day. This has been the Fox Valley Film Critics.